tell us a little bit about Drone Complier. How did you start and what do you do?
Drone Complier is a combination of companies that my business partner and I brought together. So his company, which is out of Australia, RPAS Training, and my company, VDOS. We both saw a future in the need for creating a compliance platform that could help other companies stand up their operations. So we found a common thread in what we were doing and our goals, and we formed Drone Complier, which is a software tool that helps companies that are managing their operations, their compliance, their airspace, the legal liabilities in a simple app, and ensure that their operations are standardized across distributed locations and non sort of easy ways to makes it easy for people to be compliant, basically.
Okay, so they can focus on what they want to get done, and you just help them get there, I guess.
Correct. Most companies, are not aviation companies. So when it comes to a roofer or an insurance company that doesn't want to deal with the federal aviation regulations and they don't want to read the FARs, Drone Complier takes care of all of that and simplifies it in a way that they can make sure that they're staying in compliance with federal level, state, and then any local or insurance requirements as well.
Okay. So you recently aided with the study of bowhead whales. How did that come about?
We've been doing work in the Arctic since 2011, 2012. Most of the work was out of Alaska originally, and then through sort of the operational history in the work that we did up there for Shell Oil, we kind of built some knowledge about how to work in that environment. And then through those networks, we were approached by the World Wildlife Fund and a researcher to go support some operations up in the Canadian Arctic, doing work up there with bowhead whales up there.
Why do we need to study them? What was sort of the impetus behind the whole thing?
There are several reasons why people are looking at the Arctic. One of the biggest factors up there has to do with there was a concern that there was an increase in shipping that was going to be going through a sensitive habitat. And the researchers wanted to make sure that they understood what was going on with the baseline, the environment. So, you knew the health of the populations, their behavior patterns, et cetera. So if there were effects coming from the increased shipping or other activities up there, you could then know what was supposed to be occurring versus what is actually occurring. So it really was an attempt to baseline the operations from an environmental standpoint.
Okay. And what was sort of who arrived at the idea that flying drones would be helpful for this study?
Drones have been used, like I say, we started flying drones back in 2009, 2010 when we were working at Evergreen and did the first Scan Eagle missions up in the Beaufort and Chukchi Sea. The drones fit this environment very well. The traditional dull, dirty, and dangerous for drones. This is clearly one of the dull missions where you're just, looking for wildlife, which is not exactly exciting at times. And you're operating in a pretty harsh environment offshore up in the Arctic Ocean where you don't want to put people in airplanes. So the idea is, Bill Koski from LGL is one of the big champions of this early on. And Shell Oil, with their environmental research that they were doing up in the Arctic, they wanted to reduce some of the risk, and drones were a natural fit for what we were doing. The original work was done with Scan Eagles, built by In Situ, which was originally designed to find tuna. So it was a great application for this up in the Arctic.
And what kind of hardware did you use for this, the drones, and what sort of communication systems were you using?
Most of the recent work, in fact, all the recent work have been done with just DJI Phantoms. The system is small enough to operate from small boats. Thomas Seitz, who has been the operating, basically the pilot for most of these, for these missions, for the bowhead whales up in the Canadian Arctic, had great success with the DJI Phantom. You're not operating from a large ship, so you have to have, hand launch and hand recovery. But the quality and the data received from that is pretty spectacular.
And what kind of sensors were you using? Just cameras or anything?
Yeah, it's all just EO cameras. And on Scan Eagles, it was their EO. We've not done any IR missions yet over the water. On land, we've done some IR work, but over water, it's all just been EO work with the standard cameras and gimbals that come with the drones. And
so you got imagery to track them and better understand them. what other kind of results were you able to get out of it?
You know, the data received so far has been pretty spectacular. The researchers have discovered behavior patterns and observed the whales doing things that were never seen before. It's clearly given people, it's proven out the technology that it works in this environment, that there's real value in using a drone to do environmental research. The environment up in the Arctic is always difficult to work in. So anything you can do to help reduce the risk and improve the data collection is a great win. And there's clearly more work to do. But this has, you know, been a real eye-opener, I think, for the researchers and those involved in the value that it brings to what's actually occurring up there.
And sort of what was the capability that they brought you that you didn't have before? I mean, I assume you could fly up there, but previously you're flying with much larger aircraft. Was it the ability to use smaller systems?
The work that we were doing up in Alaska is basically being done by twin otter aircraft. So you're taking something that, you know, it's a large aircraft that, you know, has a large crew on board, and you're stripping it down now to putting no people at risk over the water. The cost savings, the operational savings, the better data collection. In 2012, I actually built sensors, and we did a large study up in the Alaskan, basically off the North Slope out of Prudhoe Bay and at a Dead Horse, where we took built sensors for the twin otters, and then flew two twin otters and compared the data that was on board from the sensors to the data that was collected by the human observers on the aircraft. And basically was the first time that anybody had ever done a statistically valid comparison between what a sensor was able to observe and what humans were able to observe. And in that one summer alone, we took over 48,000 images, nearly 50 terabytes of data, and we were able to prove fairly quickly the value of the sensor over the human eyeballs. And you know, the information you get is, one, you're not disturbing the animals. Two, you get to observe them in a behavior where they don't know they're being observed, so you see them actually behaving as they would in the wild. You get statistically valid information. You can go back and you can look at the information. You know, it's funny to see the collects. As soon as we flew over, you know, walrus haulouts, and not only did they want to know the number of walrus then, but then they started to ask questions like, how many are pregnant? You know, how many pups? What's the, you know, how fat are the animals? What's the health of the animals? So you go from an observation where the observer makes an estimated guess about how many number of animals there actually are, to being able to statistically know how many animals there are, and then what is the health of the population. So the data you collect and the risk reduction is incredibly valuable.
And you mentioned the harsh environment. What sort of problems did that pose, and how would you kind of in the future like to overcome those?
Yeah, well, we're still challenged with battery powered up in the Arctic. You know, the technology is still is got some limitations. You're talking about an incredibly harsh environment. You know, and some of the operations we did, you know, got down to minus 25, 30 degrees. So, you know, batteries and gimbals and things don't operate very well in those conditions. So, you know, the technology that's built for the mass market isn't really well suited for that environment. So that's one of the challenges that we will face, is how do you take something that isn't really built for those conditions and operate it safely. But the flip side of that is that you're not putting people out in those conditions. So yeah, you can risk the loss of the aircraft now, or you're not worried about putting somebody in those conditions where you're risking losing life.
So I assume you had a few spares on hand as you were flying.
You always have spares, yes. Yep.
And you talked about not, you know, interfering with the animals. How close could you get to them versus, you know, obviously a manned aircraft would be a little bit higher? Yeah,
you know, it really would depend, but you never really want to go below, I think the most that was flown with the DJI Phantoms was about 50 feet. If you're going higher than that, you're seeing more area. With Scan Eagles, we had a zoom, so we could fly a little bit higher. It really depends on the sensor that you have on board. With the twin otters, they wouldn't fly any lower than 1,100 feet above the animals. So it depends on your permit that you have, depends on your sensor, and it depends on, you know, what you're trying to collect from a data standpoint. You know, all of this that you're doing, anytime you're looking at marine mammals or any sort of species, there are certain permits that you have to go through to be able to do this. And you can't just go up and fly without going through the proper authorities to get the proper permits to go out and look at the animals, because they are sensitive and you don't want to do something that's going to disturb them or create some sort of an incidental issue where, you know, the animals get spooked and they run off and you have a real issue. So getting all the permits and all that ahead of time is going to then dictate what your elevation and how you're going to do your operations are going to be.
And so do you see going forward, I know that there have been some other uses of these systems for this kind of work with similar good results. The animals weren't stressed and they were able to count them and that sort of thing. Do you see this as being a major tool in the toolkit for environmental studies going forward?
Oh, it already is. I mean, if you look at what Vulcan's doing in Africa, you know, against poachers and the data they're collecting, you know, trying to support elephant research, rhinoceros research in Africa, we've seen great effects doing population counts up in the Arctic, you know, looking at caribou and other animals on land and things like that. I mean, the incredible tool that this allows us to collect information is going to make this incredibly important going forward as well.
And do you foresee for yourself in Drone Complier doing more of this work, or what's sort of your thrust going forward?
You know, we will, if there's, we will not turn down any operational work. I mean, we're certainly, you know, have some success here in like working and supporting environmental research and being involved in these activities. Our software, though, is really taking off, literally. You know, we've, in Australia, the government of Australia is using it for, much like the FAA's Know Before You Fly app. We've got over 70,000 users in Australia. Looks like we've got several other countries that are looking at taking this on. And then we've got large enterprise companies and insurance underwriters and things that are starting to use the app for all of their clients as well. So we're pretty excited about where the software is going. We certainly are helping these companies get stood up and helping them do their own operations. I think if you look at the trend where the technology is going, we're seeing a lot of automation. So the idea of us as an operating company going forward is probably going to morph into more of a consulting, helpful company to let the environmental researchers do their own flights and collect their own data, because that's what the technology is enabling people to do. But we'll see where we'll see where the market goes, and you know, between our training, our operations, and our software, we're helping a lot of companies get their own programs up and going.
Okay, so they don't know what they don't know, and you help them kind of get started, I would guess.
Exactly, and that's pretty common. We see a lot. You know, you take an environmental researcher who's never flown in his life. So, you know, we can help them stand up their operations, their SOPs, and then the software will manage their operations going forward, much like, you know, basically our software is a virtual SMS, safety management system.
Okay. And so your company, you like you said, you're doing work in different countries. How difficult is that in terms of the different regulations?
You know, fortunately from the start, our software was built around ICAO rules, and that's the foundation. And then from there, you can tailor it based upon the specific airspace requirements. But the principles around a safety management system are common throughout aviation, you know, programs. And ICAO is the governing body, you know, is the international regulatory authority. So starting there, it gives us a core. And then we tailor it based upon the individual country's airspace and regulatory compliance requirements through the maps and you know, some of the modifications in the way the software works. But the core is common throughout aviation.
Okay.
I don't know, Brett, did you ever meet Tommy?
I don't think so.
So Tommy's our director of operations, and Tommy was with me at Evergreen and has been. He did deployments in the Middle East and, you know, flew Scanning Goal as well. And then he's been doing a lot of the recent Bowhead work.
Okay.
Morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. So what can you tell me about the flying environment that you were dealing with in the Bowhead study?
It was taxing. It was difficult. We learned a lot of stuff and got lucky out of the 3 years up there doing it. We only lost one aircraft. It was there was a lot of different issues that we had to get through, you know, working in that environment, working on the boat, packed full of people with gear, all kinds of electronics, proximity to the pole, and the weather and conditions themselves.
How long were you, so you worked on it for 3 years?
Basically, yes,
okay.
three summers.
Okay. And what was kind of the biggest challenge out of all of those that you mentioned?
The environment.
And how much flight time did you get per aircraft?
Oh, I'd really have to, this last time, I was there half the time and probably flew twice as much. I would say at least 10 hours a day of nonstop flying, basically flying the aircraft for 20 minutes-ish, returning the aircraft, changing batteries, and putting it back up. Anywhere from 5 to 10 hours a day.
Would you have multiple aircraft, and like one coming in, one going out, or did you need to?
No, was the only one flying. We don't operate 2 aircraft at the same time. After the loss of the aircraft, we were down to 1 bird, so I was nervous the rest of the trip.
Sure. Were you using first-person view, or how did you control? Or
well, we have an observer always, and that allowed me to use first-person view. That way I could stay on the animal. That way I would basically cover my head with a coat or something so to keep the glare off the tablet, and then I could follow the animal that way, because it was really difficult to follow the animal, especially when they would go under. We saw a lot of behavior over the 3 years, and it was interesting this last time that the animals started to behave differently around the boat. And the boat was always what they reacted to, never the aircraft, except for when we went over the beluga whales. They could hear the high frequency of the aircraft, and they would instantly dive away from the aircraft, which was completely different from what the bowheads would do.
Would they hear it from any altitude, or I mean, what?
Oh, no. And it really didn't help that we were working in really, really poor conditions as far as water clarity. It was runoff from the storm up there off the glacier, and it was just, it looked like chocolate milk.
That was this year. Right?
That was this year. It was as soon as and it's hard to believe, but you know, the belugas, they would disappear. The bright white animal, they would almost disappear completely as soon as they would dive. It was crazy. But there were hundreds around us. You could hear them from the boat. It was interesting.
But the bowheads wouldn't respond to the aircraft.
Almost never. They would respond to the boat, you know, in different ways. And this year it was harder to biopsy and track the whales, because I think they had started to learn our methods.
Okay.
Over 3 years.
Are you done with this work, or is there a further component of it?
I think we're done for now. If there's a requirement or something that comes up, we're definitely look at it, you know, at a case-by-case basis, like we do everything else.
Was that a different experience for you? Had you done that sort of work before?
Oh, absolutely. I've never done that type of stuff. Like Brian alluded to earlier, I usually, when I was operationally flying, it was in theater for government contracting. And I hadn't been flying for a long time when I went back to do this. And the reason I went to do this was we were actually short-staffed at the time. So it made sense for me to go do it.
We just want to give Tommy a vacation up in the Canadian Army.
Here he goes.
I hear it. Great.
So yeah, the first year we didn't have very good results because we were basically landlocked from the ice. We didn't see any animals. In fact, I didn't even see a single seal. We were completely iced in. Second year is when we had all these very stunning images and witness all this interesting behavior that, you know, to where stuff that I ended up seeing all the time with him rubbing on rocks and other behavior that are now being published. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I look forward to seeing some of the video and stills. I've seen a couple just on a website, but nothing in great detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very stunning stuff. It just really, and the imagery really depended on the weather. A lot of times, if the weather was really poor and choppy, you would get really poor imagery, obviously, because the water was really hard to look through. But you could see the animals at depth. Okay. Where the boats had no idea that they were there. The boat captains were pretty extraordinary, really. And Ricky, they could track the fluke beats on the water where I'm barely seeing the animal and they could see it too. I mean, it amazes me. Ricky, he was amazing, that guy's eyes. But then I could see down into the water where they couldn't. They could lose the whale and they'd have no idea where it was, and I could stay right on top of it.
All right. Well, thanks again. Nice to meet you, and good to see you again, Brian.
Yeah, good to see you.
Of course.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brett.